My stepdaughter looked me dead in the eye, threw her glass of vintage red wine across my custom Persian rug, and announced that her father said I was nothing but the family ATM. When I looked to my new husband for support, he glared at me in front of our entire Thanksgiving dinner table and said, "She is not your daughter, do not correct her." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply took a sip of my bourbon, smiled, and said fine. By sunrise, her luxury SUV was towed, her unlimited black card was declined, and her $60,000 college tuition was entirely revoked. He was right. I was not her mother. But I was about to teach her a lesson her mother never did. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an entitled person exactly whose house they are living in. My name is Nia, and at 42 years old, I had built a wealth management empire in Atlanta from absolutely nothing. I was a self-made woman who knew the value of every single dollar I earned. My husband Marcus, on the other hand, was a 46-year-old public relations director who carried himself like a billionaire, completely funded by my bank accounts. When we married 2 years ago, I knew he had a daughter from a previous relationship. Chloe was 19, a sophomore at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and possessed a level of arrogance that could only be cultivated by a father who never told her no. I had spent the last 2 years trying to build a bridge with her, paying for her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, and her expensive education. I thought my generosity would buy her respect. Instead, it only bought her contempt. Only bought. The breaking point happened during our Thanksgiving dinner. I had gone all out for the holiday, hiring a private chef to cater a spectacular meal at my $4 million estate in Buckhead. The dining room was picture perfect. Crystal glasses caught the light from the modern chandeliers, and the long mahogany table was covered in an elaborate feast. Marcus was sitting at the head of the table pouring expensive wine that I had paid for, acting like the king of a castle he did not own. Sitting to his right was Chloe, scrolling on her phone with a bored expression, ignoring the beautiful truffle-roasted turkey the chef had just placed in the center of the table. Chloe picked up her silver fork, poked at the turkey on her plate, and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. She dropped the fork so hard it clattered against the fine china. "I cannot eat this," she announced, rolling her eyes. "The turkey is completely dry, and I specifically asked for vegan options." "The chef is right there," I reminded her gently, keeping my voice low. "He prepared a massive spread of roasted vegetables and a specialized vegan roast just for you. There at the other end of the table." She scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Whatever. I am not hungry anyway. I actually have something more important to talk about." She turned her entire body toward Marcus, completely ignoring my presence. "Dad, I found the perfect 2-bedroom condo in the center of Buckhead. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop pool. I told the realtor we would put the down payment on it by Monday. It is the perfect coming-of-age gift for me, do not you think?" I set my wineglass down, the crisp sound drawing the attention of the few extended family members who were dining with us. "Chloe," I began, keeping my tone perfectly measured, "we are not buying you a luxury condo. You are currently living in a beautiful campus apartment that is fully paid for." Chloe whipped her head toward me, her eyes flashing with instant hostility. "I was not talking to you," she snapped. "I was talking to my dad." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. "And your dad is not the one who writes the checks. You are currently failing 2 of your core classes. Your credit card statement last month was over $12,000, mostly spent on designer handbags and club VIP tables. You have not shown the maturity to handle the responsibilities you already have, let alone a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate." The dining room went completely silent. The only sound was the soft jazz music playing from the hidden speakers. Chloe stared at me, her chest heaving with indignation. She was not used to hearing the word no. Marcus had always coddled her, smoothing over her failures, and demanding that I fund her whims to keep the peace in our marriage. But I was done keeping a peace that cost me my self-respect. "You cannot tell me what to do!" Chloe raised her voice, her face twisting with pure entitlement. You are just a stuck-up controlling woman who thinks money can buy people. You are not my mother. I am not your mother, I agreed calmly. But I am the person funding your entire existence. If you want to speak to me with such disrespect, you can do it from outside of my house. That was when the dam broke. Chloe stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. She grabbed her full glass of vintage red wine and hurled the contents straight across the table. The dark red liquid splashed over the white floral centerpieces and soaked right into the center of my custom Persian rug. My dad says you are just the gold mine of this house, she screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at my face. You are just a walking ATM. You have no right to give orders to anyone here. You are lucky my dad even married you. I did not wipe the few drops of wine that had splashed onto my sleeve. I slowly turned my gaze to Marcus. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to reprimand his spoiled daughter. I waited for the man I married to act like a partner, to defend his wife in her own home, to draw a line that his child could not cross. Marcus slowly put his napkin on the table. He did not look at the ruined rug. He did not look at Chloe. He looked directly at me, his jaw clenched in anger. She is not your daughter, he said, his voice dripping with venom. Do not correct her. You embarrassed her in front of everyone. Just write the check for the condo and stop causing so much drama over money. The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. The betrayal did not just sting, it burned. He had just validated every terrible thing his daughter had said. He had publicly humiliated me in front of his family, and the staff confirming that to him my only value was my bank account. He expected me to bow my head to apologize for being too aggressive to open my wallet and buy their forgiveness. Instead, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of absolute clarity. The illusion of my marriage evaporated in an instant, leaving behind the cold, hard truth. I was surrounded by parasites. I looked at Marcus, then at Chloe, who was smirking triumphantly, believing she had just won the ultimate victory. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and smiled. It was a flawless, terrifyingly calm smile. Fine, I said. Just that one word. Fine. I pushed my chair back, stood up with perfect posture, and walked out of the dining room without another glance. I heard Marcus sigh loudly behind me, telling the guests to ignore my attitude, assuring them that I would calm down and open my checkbook by morning. He was so tragically mistaken. I walked up the sweeping staircase to my master's suite and locked the door behind me. I walked straight to my home office and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I logged into my primary wealth management portal. I did not cry. My hands did not shake. I operated with the surgical precision of a woman who had just realized she needed to cut out a tumor. First, I navigated to the authorized users on my Platinum credit account. I located Chloe's name. With one click, her spending limit dropped to 0. The card was permanently locked. Next, I opened the university billing portal. The $60,000 tuition payment for her upcoming semester was scheduled to process on Monday. I canceled the transaction. Finally, I contacted the private towing company I used for my corporate properties. I typed out a quick, decisive order to have the Range Rover parked in my driveway, which was registered solely to my limited liability company, towed and secured at a private lot before sunrise. I closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of expensive bourbon. As I looked out the window at the city lights of Atlanta, I took a slow sip. Marcus and Chloe thought they could treat me like a bank while disrespecting me in my own home. They thought my money was their birthright. But they were about to wake up to a very harsh reality. The gold mine was officially closed and the game had just begun. My 19-year-old stepdaughter looked me dead in the eye, threw a full glass of vintage red wine across my custom Persian rug, and announced that her father said I was nothing but the family ATM. When I looked to the man I married for support, he glared at me in front of our entire Thanksgiving dinner table and said, "She is not your daughter. Do not correct her." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply took a sip of my bourbon, smiled, and said fine. By sunrise, her luxury SUV was towed, her unlimited black card was declined, and her $60,000 college tuition was entirely revoked. He was right. I was not her mother. But I was about to teach her a lesson her mother never did. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an entitled person exactly whose house they are living in. My name is Nia, and at 42 years old, I had built a wealth management firm in Atlanta from absolutely nothing. I was a self-made woman who knew the value of every single dollar I earned. My husband Marcus, on the other hand, was a 46-year-old public relations director who carried himself like a billionaire completely funded by my bank accounts. When we married 2 years ago, I knew he had a daughter from a previous relationship. Chloe was 19, a sophomore at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and possessed a level of arrogance that could only be cultivated by a father who never told her no. I had spent the last 2 years trying to build a bridge with her, paying for her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, and her expensive education. I thought my generosity would buy her respect. Instead, it only bought her contempt. The breaking point happened during our Thanksgiving dinner. I had gone all out for the holiday, hiring a private chef to cater a spectacular meal at my $4 million estate in Buckhead. The dining room was picture perfect. Crystal glasses caught the light from the modern chandeliers, and the long mahogany table was covered in an elaborate feast that blended our rich African-American culinary traditions with high-end fine dining. There was truffle roasted turkey alongside bourbon-glazed candied yams and gourmet macaroni and cheese. Marcus was sitting at the head of the table pouring expensive wine that I had paid for, acting like the king of a castle he did not own. Sitting to his right was Chloe, scrolling on her phone with a bored expression, ignoring the beautiful food the chef had just placed in the center of the table. Chloe picked up her silver fork, poked at the food on her plate, and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. She dropped the fork so hard it clattered against the fine china. "I cannot eat this," she announced, rolling her eyes. "The turkey is completely dry, and I specifically asked for vegan options." "The chef is right there," I reminded her gently, keeping my voice low so as not to disturb the extended family members dining with us. "He prepared a massive spread of roasted vegetables and a specialized vegan roast just for you. They are at the other end of the table." She scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Whatever, I am not hungry anyway. I actually have something more important to talk about." She turned her entire body toward Marcus, completely ignoring my presence. "Dad, I found the perfect two-bedroom condo in the center of Buckhead. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop pool. I told the realtor we would put the down payment on it by Monday. It is the perfect coming-of-age gift for me, do you not think?" I set my wine glass down. The crisp sound drew the attention of the table. "Chloe," I began, keeping my tone perfectly measured, "we are not buying you a luxury condo. You are currently living in a beautiful campus apartment that is fully paid for." Chloe whipped her head toward me, her eyes flashing with instant hostility. "I was not talking to you," she snapped. "I was talking to my dad." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. "And your dad is not the one who writes the checks. You are currently failing 2 of your core classes. Your credit card statement last month was over $12,000, mostly spent on designer handbags and VIP tables at clubs. You have not shown the maturity to handle the responsibilities you already have, let alone a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate." The dining room went completely silent. The only sound was the soft jazz music playing from the hidden speakers. Chloe stared at me, her chest heaving with indignation. She was not used to hearing the word no. Marcus had always coddled her, smoothing over her failures and demanding that I fund her whims to keep the peace in our marriage. But I was done keeping a peace that cost me my self-respect. "You cannot tell me what to do." Chloe raised her voice, her face twisting with pure entitlement. "You are just a controlling woman who thinks money can buy people. You are not my mother." "I am not your mother," I agreed calmly. "But I am the person funding your entire existence. If you want to speak to me with such disrespect, you can do it from outside of my house." That was when the dam broke. Chloe stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. She grabbed her full glass of vintage red wine and hurled the contents straight across the table. The dark red liquid splashed over the white floral centerpieces and soaked right into the center of my custom Persian rug. My dad says you are just the gold mine of this house, she screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at my face. You are just a walking ATM. You have no right to give orders to anyone here. You are lucky my dad even married you. I did not wipe the few drops of wine that had splashed onto my sleeve. I slowly turned my gaze to Marcus. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to reprimand his spoiled daughter. I waited for the man I married to act like a partner, to defend his wife in her own home, to draw a line that his child could not cross. Marcus slowly put his napkin on the table. He did not look at the ruined rug. He did not look at Chloe. He looked directly at me, his jaw clenched in anger. She is not your daughter, he said, his voice dripping with venom. Do not correct her. You embarrassed her in front of everyone. Just write the check for the condo, and stop causing so much drama over money. The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. The betrayal did not just sting, it burned. He had just validated every terrible thing his daughter had said. He had publicly humiliated me in front of his family and the staff, confirming that to him my only value was my bank account. He expected me to bow my head to apologize for being too aggressive to open my wallet and buy their forgiveness. Instead, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of absolute clarity. The illusion of my marriage evaporated in an instant, leaving behind the cold, hard truth. I was surrounded by parasites. I looked at Marcus, then at Chloe, who was smirking triumphantly, believing she had just won the ultimate victory. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and smiled. It was a flawless, terrifyingly calm smile. Fine, I said. Just that one word. Fine. I pushed my chair back, stood up with perfect posture, and walked out of the dining room without another glance. I heard Marcus sigh loudly behind me, telling the guests to ignore my attitude, assuring them that I would calm down and open my checkbook by morning. He was so tragically mistaken. I walked up the sweeping staircase to my master's suite and locked the door behind me. I walked straight to my home office and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I logged into my primary wealth management portal. I did not cry. My hands did not shake. I operated with the surgical precision of a woman who had just realized she needed to cut out a tumor. First, I navigated to the authorized users on my Platinum credit account. I located Chloe's name. With one click, her spending limit dropped to 0. The card was permanently locked. Next, I opened the university billing portal. The $60,000 tuition payment for her upcoming semester was scheduled to process on Monday. I canceled the transaction. Finally, I contacted the private towing company I used for my corporate properties. I typed out a quick, decisive order to have the Range Rover parked in my driveway, which was registered solely to my limited liability company, towed and secured at a private lot before sunrise. I closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of expensive bourbon. As I looked out the window at the city lights of Atlanta, I took a slow sip. Marcus and Chloe thought they could treat me like a bank while disrespecting me in my own home. They thought my money was their birthright, but they were about to wake up to a very harsh reality. The gold mine was officially closed, and the game had just begun. Dawn broke over Buckhead with the crisp chill of a late November morning. The serene silence of my estate was suddenly and violently shattered by a high-pitched scream echoing from the front courtyard. I sat perfectly still at my mahogany desk, taking a slow sip of my freshly brewed espresso. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office, I had a perfect view of the driveway. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck was currently securing the front wheels of a pristine white Range Rover. Chloe was running down the front steps in her silk pajamas, completely barefoot on the cold stone pavers. She was waving her arms frantically at the driver, her face twisted in a mask of pure hysteria. The driver, a professional contractor I used exclusively for my corporate properties, simply handed her a printed dispatch slip through his rolled-down window and drove away. The massive diesel engine roared to life, pulling Chloe's favorite status symbol out of the iron gates and down the street. The show was just beginning. Heavy, furious footsteps thundered up the sweeping staircase. Marcus did not bother to knock. He slammed his fist against the heavy oak door of my office before kicking it open. He stood in the doorframe breathless, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He was wearing his expensive cashmere sweatpants, his usual carefully groomed public relations image completely abandoned. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Marcus roared, stepping into my office and slamming his hands flat on my desk. "Did you just have my daughter's car stolen from our driveway? Call them right now. Call them and tell them to bring it back before I call the police and have you arrested for grand theft." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply placed my espresso cup on its saucer and looked up at him with absolute calm. "You can certainly call the police, Marcus. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Let us invite the Atlanta Police Department into our home so I can show them exactly who owns that vehicle." I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a sleek black folder. I tossed it onto the center of the desk right between his white-knuckled hands. "Open it," I instructed. Marcus snatched the folder, his eyes darting across the documents inside. His face went from red to a sickly shade of gray in a matter of seconds. Inside was the vehicle registration, the title, and the insurance paperwork. "As you can clearly read," I said, leaning back in my leather chair, "that vehicle is not registered to Chloe. It is not registered to you. It is registered exclusively to Nia and Company Wealth Management, my limited liability corporation. It is a company asset. Since Chloe decided to remind me last night that she is not my daughter, and that I have absolutely no authority over her, I realized it was highly inappropriate for a non-employee and non-relative to be driving a company vehicle. I merely ordered a corporate asset retrieval." Marcus threw the folder back onto the desk, his chest heaving. "You are being a vindictive, petty woman. She is a 19-year-old girl. You embarrassed her at dinner, and now you are trying to ruin her life because of a spilled glass of wine." "It was not a spilled glass of wine, Marcus. It was a declaration of your profound disrespect." I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored trousers. I walked around the desk until I was standing merely inches away from him. "When you looked at me at that dinner table and told me not to correct her, you made the rules of this house very clear. You drew a line in the sand. You established that I am just a wallet with a heartbeat. Well, today the wallet is closed." Suddenly, Chloe burst into the office. She was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her phone in one hand and her sleek metal credit card in the other. "Dad," she wailed, rushing to stand behind Marcus. "The towing guy would not listen to me. And when I tried to order an Uber to go to campus, my card was declined. I checked my student portal to see if there was a glitch, and my winter semester tuition has been reversed. I am going to be dropped from my classes on Monday." Marcus turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and panic. "You canceled her tuition. You locked her card, Nia. You have gone entirely too far. Turn her card back on immediately. I am your husband, and I am telling you to fix this." I let out a soft, dry laugh. "You are my husband, Marcus. But you seem to have a severe misunderstanding of what that title entails. You stepped into this marriage 2 years ago with a leased sedan, a mountain of credit card debt from trying to keep up appearances in your public relations circles, and an entitled teenager who treats everyone like the help. I paid off your debts. I upgraded your wardrobe. I moved you into a $4 million estate that I bought with cash before I even met you. You brought absolutely nothing to this financial partnership except liabilities." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. "The black card your daughter is crying over, primary account holder is Nia Dubois. The bank account that pays for her overpriced art supplies, funded by my investment dividends. You demanded that I not act like her mother. I am simply following your instructions. I am acting like a financial institution, and right now Chloe is a terrible investment. Her funding has been officially cut." Chloe gasped, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her father. "Dad, do something. Make her turn it back on. I cannot be seen riding the public bus to SCAD. Everyone will laugh at me." Marcus looked at his crying daughter, then looked at me. His usual smooth, charming demeanor was completely shattered. The facade of the powerful, providing patriarch had been stripped away, leaving only a desperate man who realized he had zero leverage. But his pride was too massive to admit defeat. Instead of apologizing, he chose to double down on his arrogance. "You think having money makes you God?" Marcus snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You think you can treat my blood like garbage just because your name is on the deed to this house? You are an arrogant, bitter woman. You have no idea what family means. I am not going to let you abuse my daughter. I crossed my arms and tilted my head. Then provide for her, Marcus. If you are the man of the house, pull out your own credit card. Pay her $60,000 tuition. Go buy her a new Range Rover. Go ahead. Be the father you claim to be. He swallowed hard. We both knew his bank account balance could barely cover a weekend trip to Miami, let alone his daughter's extravagant lifestyle. The silence in the room was deafening. He had no money, no power, and absolutely no ground to stand on. Marcus took a step back, his eyes narrowing with a toxic, desperate kind of hatred. You think you have won because you control the bank accounts. We will see about that. You need to be taught some respect for your husband. Let us see what my family has to say about your psychotic behavior. He pulled his phone out of his sweatpants pocket and aggressively swiped across the screen. I am calling Jamal and Becky right now. They warned me about you. They warned me that successful black women always try to emasculate their men. I am having them come over here immediately. We are going to have a family meeting, and you are going to sit down, shut up, and learn your place in my family. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and stormed out of my office, shouting into his phone as he descended the stairs, complaining to his brother about my sudden, inexplicable cruelty. I stood in my office alone, listening to his frantic voice echo through the grand foyer. I did not feel threatened. I felt invigorated. He was calling his brother Jamal, a man whose failed startup was secretly being kept afloat by Marcus, and his white sister-in-law Becky, a woman who specialized in passive-aggressive racism and fake smiles. They were coming to my house to put me in my place. I walked over to my desk, picked up my espresso, and took another sip. The coffee was still warm. The real war was about to start, and I could not wait to watch them all burn. Less than 40 minutes later, the heavy brass knocker on my front doors echoed through the grand foyer. Marcus practically sprinted from the kitchen to open it, welcoming his reinforcements. I remained seated in my home office for a few more minutes, taking my time. Let them wait. Let them stew in their self-righteous indignation. When I finally descended the sweeping glass staircase, I found them assembled in my formal living room like a tribunal. Marcus was pacing back and forth across the imported silk rug, running his hands over his face to appear exasperated and victimized. Sitting on the plush velvet sofa was his younger brother Jamal. Jamal was a man who carried the unearned confidence of a successful entrepreneur, despite the fact that his last 3 tech startups had quietly folded. Next to him sat his wife Becky. She was gripping a stunning Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag on her lap, her legs crossed tightly. Becky loved to play the role of the cultured progressive ally, while constantly slipping in comments that reminded me exactly how she viewed my success. I walked into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I did not offer them a beverage. I did not welcome them to my home. I simply sat down in the high-backed leather armchair directly across from them, crossed my legs, and rested my hands in my lap. I looked at the 3 of them waiting in absolute silence. Marcus stopped pacing and pointed at me. Tell them, Nia. Tell my brother what you did to a 19-year-old girl this morning just because you threw a tantrum over Thanksgiving dinner. I did not look at Marcus. I kept my gaze fixed on Becky and Jamal. I am sure Marcus has already given you a highly edited version of events, I said, my voice soft but commanding. So let us bypass the theatrics. Why are you sitting in my living room? Becky leaned forward, putting on her most sympathetic, overly concerned face. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. Nia, sweetie, we are here because we care about this family. Marcus called us practically in tears. I know you independent black women feel this constant, overwhelming need to be strong. You feel like you have to control every little thing in your environment because of the world we live in. But you have to remember that Marcus is the man of the house. You cannot just aggressively emasculate him over a financial disagreement. You are being too hostile with your money, Nia. It is toxic for the family dynamic. I stared at her, letting her deeply offensive, patronizing words hang in the air. She actually believed she was delivering profound wisdom. She actually thought she had the right to sit in a house that my blood and sweat had paid for and lecture me on my racial identity and my aggressive behavior. I slowly uncrossed my legs and leaned forward, mirroring her posture. The man of the house, I repeated, tasting the sheer absurdity of the phrase. A provider. Is that what you are calling him, Becky? I shifted my gaze to Marcus, who suddenly looked a bit less confident. Let us talk about this provider. Let us talk about the man whose masculinity I am supposedly destroying. Marcus, do you want to tell them who pays the $5,000 monthly fee for the Buckhead Country Club where you entertain your friends? Do you want to tell them who paid off the $80,000 in credit card debt you were hiding when we got married? Do you want to tell your brother who pays for the imported Cuban cigars you hand out so generously at his house every Sunday? Marcus swallowed hard, his face flushing. Nia, that is private marital business. You do not need to air our finances. You brought them into our marital business, Marcus, I countered sharply, not raising my voice but ensuring every word cut like glass. You called a family court, so court is in session. I turned my attention back to Becky, whose fake sympathetic smile had completely vanished. And since we are on the topic of my aggressive financial behavior, Becky, let us talk about that bag sitting on your lap. It is a beautiful piece. Himalayan crocodile is very hard to source. Marcus gave that to you for your birthday last month, did he not? He told you he used his bonus to buy his favorite sister-in-law something special. Becky looked down at the bag, her fingers tightening around the handles. Yes, she said, her voice losing its previous arrogance. He did. I smiled. It was a cold, merciless smile. Marcus does not get bonuses, Becky. His public relations firm has not paid out bonuses in 2 years. He bought that $40,000 bag using his supplementary American Express card, the card that is linked directly to my primary wealth management account. The bill came to my desk 3 weeks ago. I paid it. So when you sit in my custom-built home and call me aggressive with my money, you should probably remember that my money is currently resting on your lap. I bought you that bag, Becky. You are welcome. Jamal jumped up from the sofa, his face contorted with rage. He looked at his brother, then glared at me. You do not talk to my wife like that. You think you own us because you have some cash. You think you can just sit up there and humiliate my brother and my wife. You are nothing but a bitter, arrogant woman who does not know how to treat a man. I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I simply looked up at Jamal, observing his fragile ego cracking under the weight of the truth. I treat men who provide with respect, Jamal, I said smoothly, but I do not respect parasites, and right now my living room is infested with them. You disrespectful. Jamal took a step toward me, raising his voice, his fists clenched at his sides. I am not going to stand here and let you talk down to my family. You need to learn some respect. The sheer audacity of him trying to intimidate me in my own fortress was laughable. I did not yell back. I simply reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out my phone, and pressed a single button on my speed dial. The call connected instantly to the elite security team that patrolled my gated community. Yes, this is Nia Dubois at the main estate, I said, my eyes locked dead on Jamal. I have 2 trespassers currently in my living room who are becoming hostile and refusing to leave. I need them escorted off the premises immediately. Yes, the brother and his wife. Thank you. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the glass coffee table. They will be here in less than 60 seconds, I informed them. I suggest you start walking toward the door if you want to avoid the embarrassment of being physically removed in front of the neighbors. Becky stood up, her face pale, grabbing Jamal by the arm. Jamal, let us go. She is crazy. She is actually crazy. Jamal glared at me, breathing heavily, but he allowed his wife to pull him toward the grand foyer. Marcus ran his hands over his bald head, looking between his retreating family and me. He was backed into a corner, and instead of admitting defeat, he chose the only weapon he thought he had left. His absence. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are sick, Nia. You are completely out of control. I am not staying here to be treated like an inmate. I am packing a bag. I am staying with Jamal and Becky until you learn how to respect your husband and act like a proper wife. He thought this was a punishment. He actually believed that threatening to leave would bring me to my knees. He thought I would cry, beg him to stay, and promise to change. He was operating under the delusion that his presence was a prize I could not bear to lose. I looked at him and offered a slight approving nod. I think that is a wonderful idea, Marcus. Take as much time as you need. Just remember to pack light. I would hate for you to strain your back carrying suitcases you did not pay for. Marcus turned on his heel and stormed up the stairs to the master suite. Within minutes, I heard the heavy thud of his designer duffel bag hitting the hardwood floor. He marched back down the stairs, bypassed the living room completely, and slammed the heavy front doors behind him. Through the window, I watched him get into Jamal's car. The community security vehicle was already idling in the driveway, ensuring they left the neighborhood without incident. I sat alone in the vast silence of my living room. I did not shed a single tear. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The house already felt lighter, cleaner. But I knew Marcus well enough to know he would not just walk away quietly. He was a man who felt entitled to my empire, and he would try to secure his lifestyle by any means necessary. I picked up my phone and opened my banking application, ready to review my security protocols. That was when I saw the flashing red notification. It was a high-level security alert from my private bank. An unauthorized transaction had just been initiated. Someone was currently attempting to bypass the two-factor authentication on our joint emergency savings account. They were trying to wire $200,000 in liquid cash to an external routing number. I clicked on the transaction details. The recipient account was listed under a name I recognized instantly, Becky. They thought they were clever. They thought they could drain my liquid assets while Marcus was storming out the front door. I smiled, leaning back into the leather chair. They had just handed me the shovel they were going to use to dig their own graves. The soft blue light from my iPad cast long shadows across the empty master suite. It was exactly 2:17 in the morning. I had been sitting in the dark reviewing my investment portfolios when a harsh red banner flashed across the screen, overriding everything else. It was an emergency security alert from my private bank. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the initial warning screens. Someone was actively attempting to transfer $200,000 in liquid cash out of our joint emergency savings account. They were trying to bypass the two-factor authentication by routing the request through a secondary device approved on Marcus's profile. I watched the progress bar inch forward, the numbers attempting to vanish into the digital ether. I did not panic. I simply hit the emergency freeze protocol. The screen flashed green, confirming the lockdown. I had designed the security architecture of my account specifically for situations like this. The money was safe, but the real revelation was in the transaction details. I traced the IP address of the request. It originated from the luxury condo complex where Jamal and Becky lived, and the beneficiary account was not a standard checking account. It was a business holding account registered under the name Jamal and Becky Ventures. Marcus was not just trying to steal from me, he was actively trying to siphon my wealth into his brother's failing business to hide it before filing for a divorce. He actually thought he could drain my liquid assets in the middle of the night while hiding under his brother's roof. He was operating with the desperate, sloppy logic of a man who realized his golden goose had just flown away. I set the iPad down on the nightstand. The silence in the room was absolute. They thought I was just a wealthy wife they could manipulate. They did not understand that I built my wealth by seeing patterns, by identifying risks, and by ruthlessly eliminating liabilities. Marcus had just proven he was the biggest liability of all. By sunrise, I was fully dressed and standing in my home office. I did not bother with coffee. I picked up my phone and dialed a private number. The call was answered on the second ring by Elias, the head of my internal auditing team. Elias. I said, my voice crisp and businesslike. We have a situation. I need a full forensic audit on every joint account, every supplementary card, and every business expense linked to Marcus Dubois. Go back exactly 3 years. Leave no stone unturned. I want to know where every single cent of my money has gone. Elias did not ask questions. He simply agreed and promised a preliminary report by the end of the day. I ended the call and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured lawns of my estate. The morning air was crisp, but I felt a burning heat inside me. Marcus had underestimated me. He had underestimated my intelligence, my resources, and my capacity for vengeance. He thought he could outsmart me in a game I had written the rules for, but I was about to show him exactly what happens when you try to steal from the house. The game had shifted. It was no longer just about teaching Chloe a lesson. It was about dismantling the entire parasitic network Marcus had built around me, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. Walking into my Buckhead high-rise office felt different that morning. Usually, I stepped off the private elevator with my mind focused on global markets and client portfolios. Today, I was stepping onto a battlefield. My firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower, a physical manifestation of the blood, sweat, and intellect I had poured into my career over the last 2 decades. As I walked past the reception desk, the sleek, modern lines of the office and the quiet hum of extreme wealth creation grounded me. This was my domain. No one could take this from me. Elias was already waiting in the glass-walled conference room when I arrived. He did not offer a polite good morning. He knew me too well for that. He simply pushed a thick leather-bound folder across the polished mahogany table. His face was a mask of professional grimness, but his eyes betrayed a deep disgust. I sat down, smoothing my skirt, and opened the folder. The numbers stared back at me, black ink outlining the ultimate betrayal. I had expected to find Marcus secretly funding Chloe, or perhaps hiding money in a private account for a rainy day. What Elias uncovered was a highly orchestrated parasitic network that extended far beyond a spoiled teenager. Marcus had not just been siphoning my wealth. He had been actively funding the very people who sat in my living room and disrespected me. "Look at the highlighted transactions from the second quarter," Elias said, pointing to a spreadsheet. Marcus claimed he lost $250,000 in a decentralized finance venture. He played the victim perfectly, telling you it was a bad market turn. I remembered that month. I had consoled him. I had told him that investments carry risk and covered his share of our household expenses so he would not feel emasculated by the loss. "The money never touched the market," Elias continued. "It was routed through a holding company in Delaware and immediately wired into the business accounts of Jamal and Becky Ventures." I turned the page, feeling the air in the room grow thin. Jamal had spent the last 3 years bragging at every family gathering about his innovative tech startup. He paraded around in designer suits, acting like a visionary entrepreneur on the verge of a massive breakthrough. The reality was laid bare on the paper in front of me. The startup had zero actual revenue, zero legitimate clients. Its entire operational budget came from the money Marcus stole from my accounts under the guise of failed investments. I had been paying for Jamal to play the role of a successful businessman. And then there was Becky, the woman who had the audacity to sit on my sofa and lecture me about the angry black woman trope, the woman who told me I was too aggressive with my finances. Elias handed me a separate file containing the tax returns and bank statements for Southern Elegance, the high-end fashion boutique Becky owned. For 4 years, Becky had maintained the illusion of being a thriving business owner. She hosted lavish opening parties and patronized minority-owned businesses with an air of white saviorism that always made my skin crawl. The audit revealed that Southern Elegance had been hemorrhaging cash since day one. It was a glorified vanity project. When the store faced eviction last year, Marcus had forged my digital signature on a corporate guarantee, allowing him to secure a $500,000 business loan against my firm to bail her out. He had used my name, my credit, and my life's work to keep his sister-in-law from facing the consequences of her own financial incompetence. I sat back in my chair, letting the magnitude of the theft wash over me. They had constructed an entire reality built on my back. Jamal's unearned confidence, Becky's patronizing microaggressions, Marcus's false pride, all of it was funded by the very woman they actively tried to diminish. They despised my strength but happily lived off the fruits of it. Elias watched me, waiting for the explosion. He expected me to scream, to throw the files, to call the police immediately. But I did not feel anger. I felt a cold, sharp focus that eclipsed any emotional reaction. I was a surgeon examining a tumor that had spread throughout a vital organ. The only logical response was excision. "Do you want me to contact the authorities?" Elias asked quietly. "This is corporate fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. We can have Marcus arrested before lunch." I shook my head slowly, closing the folder. "No. If we arrest him now, he gets to play the victim. He will spin a story about a wealthy, vindictive wife destroying him over a misunderstanding. I want to take everything from them first. I want them to feel the exact moment the ground disappears from beneath their feet. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of authorization forms. I slid them across the table to Elias. I need you to contact Harrison and Vance, the most aggressive corporate liquidators and debt collection attorneys in Atlanta. Since Marcus forged my corporate guarantee for Becky's boutique, that means my firm legally holds the debt. I want Harrison and Vance to initiate an immediate recall on that loan due to fraudulent origination. I want liens placed on everything Jamal and Becky own. Freeze their business accounts. I want the oxygen cut off completely. Elias took the forms, a slow smile spreading across his face. Consider it done. They will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee by the end of the week. As for Marcus, I continued standing up from the table. Let him believe his little emergency transfer went through. Keep the error message ambiguous. I want him to feel safe for just a few more days while we set the final trap. I left the office feeling lighter than I had in years. The betrayal was staggering, but the power I held in my hands was absolute. I instructed my executive assistant to book a first-class flight to London for a fictitious corporate merger and to ensure Marcus received the itinerary. I packed a large designer suitcase, had my driver loaded into the town car, and made a very public exit from my estate. I wanted them to believe the coast was clear. I wanted them to think the angry wife had left the country, giving them free rein to scheme and celebrate. My driver did not take me to the airport. Instead, he dropped me off at the Waldorf Astoria, less than 10 miles away from my neighborhood. I checked into a luxury corner suite under my corporate account. The room offered panoramic views of the city, but my attention was entirely focused on the glowing screen of my phone. I changed into a silk robe, poured a glass of sparkling water, and waited. It did not take long for the rats to come out of the woodwork. Just past 10 o'clock at night, my phone vibrated with a high-priority security notification. My estate was equipped with a state-of-the-art surveillance system that I controlled directly. The alert indicated a breach at the secondary side entrance. I opened the live feed on my phone, watching the crystal-clear night vision camera. Chloe had returned. She had somehow procured a master override code likely given to her by Marcus and had disabled the main alarms. She was not alone. Behind her trailed a procession of at least 30 college students carrying cases of cheap liquor and heavy audio equipment. They poured into my pristine foyer, their muddy shoes trampling over the white marble floors. Chloe stood in the center of my living room, laughing loudly, acting like the queen of the manor. She directed a group of boys to move my custom Italian sofas to make room for a makeshift dance floor. I watched as they carelessly shoved a priceless mahogany side table against the wall, scratching the paint. I switched the camera view to the formal dining room. A group of girls had already set up a massive liquor station right on top of the dining table where the Thanksgiving disaster had occurred just days prior. They were pouring sticky, colorful drinks, laughing and taking photos for social media. Chloe walked into the frame holding a bottle of vodka. But it was not the alcohol that caught my attention. It was what she was wearing around her neck. My breath caught in my throat. Resting against Chloe's chest, catching the light of the chandeliers, was a triple-strand vintage pearl necklace. It was a flawless antique piece, the only physical heirloom my late grandmother had left me before she passed away. I kept it locked in a hidden safe inside my master closet, a safe that Marcus clearly knew how to open. He had not just given his daughter access to my home while I was supposedly out of the country. He had given her access to my most sacred personal possessions to play dress-up for her friends. The sheer audacity of the violation washed over me, replacing the cold calculation with a burning, primal fury. Chloe climbed onto my velvet sofa, swaying to the heavy bass that was vibrating through my house, raising the bottle of vodka in the air as her friends cheered. She felt untouchable. She believed she had won the house, the wealth, the lifestyle. I did not yell at the screen. I did not shed a tear over the pearls. I calmly picked up my hotel room phone and dialed the direct line for the local police precinct. I bypassed the standard emergency dispatch, using a contact I had established through my community board. "Yes, this is Nia Dubois, the homeowner of the estate on West Paces Ferry," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am currently out of town on business, and my security system has just alerted me to a massive break-in. There are dozens of unauthorized individuals destroying my property. Furthermore, I can clearly see one of the intruders wearing a piece of antique jewelry stolen from my personal safe, valued at over $150,000. I need squad cars dispatched immediately. I want full charges pressed for breaking and entering, vandalism, and grand larceny. No, there are no authorized guests. Arrest every single person inside my house. I hung up the phone and leaned back against the plush hotel pillows, watching the live feed on my screen. The music was still blaring in my living room. Chloe was still dancing on the furniture, wearing my grandmother's pearls. She had absolutely no idea that her world was about to come crashing down in a chorus of police sirens. I took a slow sip of my water, never taking my eyes off the screen, ready to enjoy the show. Watching the live feed on my hotel room screen was simply not going to be enough. Seeing my late grandmother's vintage pearls draped carelessly around the neck of an entitled, spoiled teenager ignited a fire in my chest that could not be extinguished from a distance. I ended my initial call with the security dispatch, threw off my hotel robe, and quickly dressed in a sharp black trench coat over my clothes. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for the elevator. The drive from the Waldorf Astoria to my estate on West Paces Ferry took less than 12 minutes in the dead of night, but every second felt like an eternity of cold, calculated anticipation. As I turned onto my private street, the sheer magnitude of Chloe's disrespect became impossible to ignore. The heavy bass of hip-hop music was vibrating through the thick iron gates of my property. Dozens of cars were parked haphazardly along the manicured street, their tires crushing the expensive imported landscaping I paid thousands of dollars a month to maintain. Red plastic cups and empty liquor bottles littered my pristine front lawn like garbage on a city sidewalk. I bypassed the main gate using my remote access to enter through the secondary staff entrance, parking my car out of sight behind the tall privacy hedges. I walked up to my own front door. It was wide open. The cold night air was blowing right into the grand foyer, mixing with the overwhelming stench of cheap vodka, stale beer, and marijuana. I stepped over the threshold, my heels making no sound against the deafening roar of the music. The scene inside my $4 million home was nothing short of a nightmare. The entryway, paved with imported Italian marble, was coated in a sticky layer of spilled alcohol and mud. A couple of college kids I had never seen before were making out aggressively against the wall, completely oblivious to the fact that their shoulders were rubbing against a priceless original painting by a renowned black artist. I walked past them like a ghost. I was invisible in my own home, surrounded by intruders who thought this was just another frat house venue for their weekend entertainment. I moved into the formal dining room. The custom mahogany table, the very same table where Chloe had thrown her tantrum and Marcus had publicly humiliated me just days prior, was now a makeshift bar. Puddles of sticky mixers and crushed limes were ruining the wood finish. In the corner, a young man was violently throwing up onto the silk drapes, completely ruining the fabric. I did not scream at him. I did not tell him to stop. Every single piece of damaged property was just another dollar amount I was going to legally extract from Marcus and his daughter. I simply kept walking toward the main living room, following the loudest source of the noise. There she was. Chloe was standing right on top of my custom velvet sofa, her shoes digging into the delicate fabric. She held a half-empty bottle of premium tequila in one hand, waving it in the air as her friends cheered her on from the floor. She was completely intoxicated, her hair a messy tangle, her makeup smudged around her eyes. But my gaze bypassed the bottle and locked directly onto her neck. The triple-strand vintage pearl necklace. My grandmother had worked her entire life cleaning houses for wealthy families in the Jim Crow South. She saved every spare penny she ever earned to buy those pearls, a symbol of dignity and elegance that she refused to be denied. She passed them down to my mother, who passed them down to me when I graduated from college. They represented generations of Black female resilient survival and grace. And now, they were being worn as a cheap party accessory by a girl whose entire existence was funded by the very woman she despised. I stepped deeper into the living room, pushing my way through the crowd of sweaty, jumping teenagers. Someone bumped hard into my shoulder, splashing a warm, sticky drink onto my trench coat. I brushed it off my eyes, remaining fixed on Chloe. I walked straight up to the edge of the sofa. "Turn the music off," I said. My voice was not a shout, but the sheer icy authority behind it made the boy standing next to the sound system freeze. He looked at me instantly, recognizing that I was not a party guest. He scrambled to hit the power button. The heavy bass cut out abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in the massive room, broken only by the confused murmurs of the crowd. Chloe stumbled slightly on the sofa cushions, looking around in annoyance. "Who turned off the music?" she slurred, bringing the tequila bottle down to her side. "I did," I replied, standing directly below her. Chloe looked down, her eyes struggling to focus on my face. When realization finally struck her, the color drained from her cheeks, but the alcohol in her system quickly replaced her shock with aggressive, unearned bravado. She let out a loud, mocking laugh, looking around at her friends as if I were the punchline to a massive joke. "What are you doing here?" she sneered, pointing the bottle at me. "You are supposed to be in London. Did you forget something? Or did you just come back to check on your little gold mine? You need to step down from that sofa, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "And you need to take my grandmother's pearls off your neck right this second." Chloe touched the pearls, her fingers wrapping around the delicate silk thread. Instead of taking them off, she gripped them tightly. A wicked, arrogant smile spread across her face. "Why should I?" she taunted, stepping closer to the edge of the sofa to tower over me. "My dad said this is our house now. He said you are going to lose half of everything anyway because you are a bitter, controlling woman. I can do whatever I want in my dad's house." She pulled hard on the necklace to emphasize her point. The old, fragile silk thread could not withstand the violent yank. A sharp snap echoed in the quiet room. The strand broke and dozens of luminous antique pearls cascaded down the front of her shirt, bouncing off the velvet sofa and scattering across the hardwood floor. The sound of those pearls hitting the ground was like glass shattering in my chest. Some of the college kids gasped, sensing the sudden dangerous shift in the atmosphere. They started backing away, realizing they had stepped into a domestic war zone. Chloe looked down at the broken string in her hand, then looked back down at me. She shrugged carelessly, kicking a loose pearl off the cushion with her foot. "Oops," she laughed. "Guess you will just have to buy a new one with all that money you care so much about." A lesser woman would have dragged her off that sofa by her hair. A lesser woman would have screamed, cried, and engaged in a physical brawl with a drunk teenager in front of an audience. But I was not a lesser woman. I was a strategist. I looked at the pearls scattered on the floor, then looked up into Chloe's smug, ignorant eyes. I did not raise a hand. I did not utter a single curse word. I gave her a long, chilling smile and took 2 steps backward. "Enjoy the party, Chloe," I said softly. I turned around and walked out of the living room, leaving her standing on the ruined sofa. I walked through the trashed foyer, stepping over the mud and spilled alcohol, and walked straight out the front door. The cold night air hit my face, clearing away the stench of the house. I stood on my front porch, pulled my phone from my coat pocket, and dialed 911. I needed to officially put the final nail in her coffin on the recorded police dispatch line. "Yes, I am the homeowner at the West Paces Ferry Estate," I said clearly into the receiver, watching as the headlights of 3 patrol cars suddenly turned onto my street, their red and blue lights flashing against the trees. "I need to report a massive break-in. There are dozens of underage individuals trespassing, destroying private property, and consuming illegal substances. Furthermore, the ringleader of this break-in has just forcefully vandalized and stolen antique jewelry from my private safe valued at $150,000. The dispatcher asked if I was in a safe location. "I am standing safely outside on the porch," I replied, watching the police cruisers pull into my driveway, blocking the gates so no one could escape. "I will be waiting right here to press full felony charges against every single person inside my house." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The heavy boots of Atlanta police officers hit the pavement, rushing past me toward the open front doors. Panic erupted from inside the mansion. Teenagers were screaming, glass was breaking, and the chaotic sounds of a massive police raid echoed into the night. I stood perfectly still on my porch, wrapping my trench coat tighter around myself against the chill, listening to the beautiful symphony of consequences finally catching up to Marcus's spoiled daughter. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the quiet exclusivity of West Pace's ferry. Red and blue lights strobed aggressively against the towering white columns of my estate, casting rhythmic neon shadows across my face. I stood on the porch, my hands tucked neatly into the pockets of my trench coat, a statue of absolute composure in the middle of absolute chaos. Dozens of uniformed officers swarmed the property. Teenagers who had been acting like untouchable royalty just minutes ago were now sprinting across the manicured lawns, tripping over their own feet in a desperate bid to escape. The officers corralled them with practiced efficiency, shining harsh flashlights into the faces of the terrified, intoxicated intruders. Then came the main event. Two officers emerged through the grand double doors, practically dragging a thrashing, hysterical Chloe between them. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs, secured behind her back, was the sweetest sound I had heard all year. Her designer silk top was stained with alcohol, and her face was a masterpiece of total humiliation. Thick black streams of mascara ran down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. Her arrogant sneer had been completely erased, replaced by the frantic, breathless panic of a spoiled child who was finally facing the real world. An evidence officer walked out behind them holding a clear plastic bag. Inside the bag rested the broken silk thread and the scattered luminous pearls of my grandmother, the physical proof of grand larceny. Chloe fought against the officer's grip, her bare feet slipping on the wet marble of the front steps. When she looked up and saw me standing there untouched and unbothered, her eyes widened in pure horror. She finally realized this was not a misunderstanding. This was an execution. "You cannot do this to me!" she screamed, her voice cracking as the officers pushed her toward the back of a squad car. "I am Marcus Dubois' daughter. You know who my dad is. Call my dad right now. You evil woman, call my dad." I did not move a single muscle. I just looked at her, letting the flashing police lights paint my face in alternating shades of crimson and blue. "Your father does not own this house," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the police radios. "And your father does not own the police department. Enjoy your night in the county holding cell, Chloe. I hear the accommodations are significantly less dry than my Thanksgiving turkey." The officer placed his hand on her head, guiding her forcefully into the back of the cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off her shrill screams. I watched the squad car back out of my driveway and disappear into the Atlanta night. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the crisp winter air, spoke briefly with the lead detective to confirm I would be pressing maximum charges, and then drove myself back to my luxury suite at the Waldorf Astoria. It was exactly 4:30 in the morning when my hotel room phone began to vibrate violently against the marble nightstand. I was sitting in a plush armchair by the window, wearing a fresh silk robe, a cup of hot chamomile tea resting in my hands. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashed Marcus's name in bold, frantic letters. He had found out. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat before I pressed accept and put the phone on speaker. "You are a monster," Marcus roared into the receiver. His voice was raw, ragged, and completely unhinged. The smooth, polished tone of the public relations director was completely gone, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. "Good morning to you too, Marcus," I replied smoothly, setting my teacup down. "Do not play games with me, Nia," he screamed. I just had to stand in a filthy, freezing bail bondsman office in the middle of downtown Atlanta. I just had to scrape the absolute bottom of my personal checking account to buy my 19-year-old daughter out of a jail cell. She is traumatized. She is covered in bruises from the handcuffs. You threw my little girl into a cage with actual criminals. You are a demon. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city lights. "Correction, Marcus. I did not throw her anywhere. The Atlanta Police Department placed her exactly where she belonged after she broke into a highly secured property, vandalized $4 million worth of real estate, and committed grand larceny by destroying an antique necklace valued at $150,000. She is a felon, Marcus. I merely provided the introduction to the justice system. She is a teenager who made a mistake. He yelled, the sound of his heavy breathing echoing through the phone. You did this to punish me. You set her up because you are a bitter, controlling, aggressive woman who cannot stand the fact that I walked out on you. You could have called me. You could have handled this like a mother. I smiled, the sheer hypocrisy of his words validating every single move I had made. I remember a very specific conversation we had in my dining room just a few days ago, Marcus. I remember you looking me dead in the eye and humiliating me in front of your entire family. What were your exact words? Ah, yes. She is not your daughter. Do not correct her. I told you I would respect your wishes as the man of the house. I did not correct her. I let the state of Georgia correct her. You should be thanking me for respecting your boundaries. Marcus let out a guttural sound of pure rage. He was trapped in his own twisted logic, suffocating on the very words he had used to try and diminish me. When a man like Marcus realizes he has no intellectual or moral high ground, he inevitably resorts to brute threats. You think this is funny? He snarled, his voice dropping an octave into a dark, venomous register. You think you can treat my blood like this and just get away with it? You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life, Nia. I am done playing nice. I am filing for divorce on Monday morning. I am taking half of everything you own. This is a marital property state. I am going to get a court order to freeze every single one of your corporate accounts. I am going to bleed your wealth management firm completely dry. By the time my lawyers are done with you, you will be begging me on your knees. You are dead. He was breathing heavily, waiting for me to react. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to scream back, to beg him to reconsider, to offer a settlement, just to make the nightmare stop. He fundamentally misunderstood the predator he was dealing with. I picked up my teacup, the porcelain clicking softly against the saucer. I am waiting for you, I said. My voice was a soft, deadly whisper. Bring your lawyers, Marcus. Bring the court orders. Bring every single threat you have. I promise you I will be waiting. I pressed the red button, cutting the call dead. The silence in the luxury suite washed over me, thick and deeply satisfying. He actually thought he could bankrupt me. He actually believed his threats carried weight. I set the tea aside and pulled my laptop onto my lap. I woke up the screen and bypassed the biometric security check. My desktop was clean, organized, and perfectly clear, except for one highly encrypted folder sitting directly in the center of the screen. I moved the cursor over the icon. The file was named Distressed Asset Acquisition and Debt Consolidation. I double-clicked the folder. Dozens of financial documents, property deeds, and commercial loan agreements populated the screen. Every single one of them represented the financial lifeblood of Marcus's family. I scrolled through the records, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. Marcus thought he was going to war, completely unaware that he had already surrendered his weapons, his armor, and his kingdom to me years ago. Let him file his papers. Let his white sister-in-law cry on the internet. Let them dig the hole as deep as they possibly could. I had the dirt ready to bury them all. The thick manila envelope landed on my glass desk with a heavy, satisfying thud. A courier had delivered it to my corporate office precisely at 9 in the morning, right on schedule. I did not need to open it to know what was inside. Marcus was remarkably predictable. I picked up my silver letter opener, sliced through the top of the envelope, and slid the legal documents out onto the pristine surface of my desk. The room was perfectly still, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my legs, and began to read. Marcus had actually done it. He had filed for divorce on the grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment. As my eyes scanned the pages, a genuine smile spread across my face. He was not just asking for a dissolution of the marriage. He was demanding a full 50% of all assets acquired during our 2 years together, claiming that his support had been instrumental to the growth of my wealth management firm. But the true comedy lay on page 4. Marcus was petitioning the court for permanent spousal support, alimony. He had instructed his discount lawyers to argue that he had sacrificed his own public relations career to manage our household and support my demanding lifestyle. He claimed he needed a massive monthly stipend to maintain the standard of living he had grown accustomed to during our marriage. He wanted to be put on a permanent payroll. He wanted me to fund his golf club memberships, his custom suits, and his imported cigars for the rest of his natural life. I traced the edge of the paper with my manicured fingernail. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of a man who brought nothing but debt into my life, now demanding to leave with half of my empire, was astounding. He truly believed the law would protect his parasitic lifestyle. He thought the court would look at a successful black woman and automatically force her to empty her pockets for a man who refused to provide for himself. Before I could even forward the documents to my legal team, my phone began to vibrate violently against the glass desk. It was not a call. It was a rapid, non-stop flood of notifications. Alerts from Instagram tags on TikTok and urgent messages from my corporate communications department. I tapped the screen and opened the first link my lead publicist had sent me. It was a video from Becky. She was sitting in her lavishly decorated living room, dressed in an oversized, neutral-colored sweater, designed to make her look small, fragile, and deeply distressed. She had perfectly executed the performance. Her blonde hair was slightly messy, her face was completely bare of makeup, and her eyes were red and puffy. She stared directly into the camera, letting out a shaky, dramatic breath before she began to speak. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Becky said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "But my family is under attack and I do not know where else to turn. My 19-year-old niece spent the night in a freezing jail cell because of a vindictive, aggressive woman who thinks her money gives her the right to destroy people." I watched the screen, my face entirely impassive. Becky was weaponizing her tears, leaning heavily into every dangerous stereotype society held about wealthy, powerful black women. She painted a picture of a tyrannical, hostile billionaire who had moved into their loving family and systematically tried to break their spirit. She described Chloe not as a vandal or a thief who stole a priceless antique, but as a traumatized teenager who made a tiny mistake and was punished with maximum malicious force. "We welcomed her into our family with open arms," Becky cried, wiping a single perfectly timed tear from her cheek. "We tried to understand her culture. We tried to support her demanding career. But she just uses her wealth to bully and intimidate us. She cut off a teenage girl's college tuition overnight. She threw my brother-in-law out on the street. She is trying to ruin us just because we dared to ask for basic respect. Please share this video. We need help standing up to this kind of toxic, unchecked financial abuse." The video had been posted less than 2 hours ago, and it already had over 1 million views. The comment section was a roaring fire of public outrage. Thousands of strangers were tearing me apart, calling for my businesses to be boycotted, demanding that I be investigated, labeling me a monster who abused a poor, defenseless blended family. Becky had successfully activated the internet outrage machine. She had cast herself and Chloe as the innocent victims of a heartless corporate tyrant. My office door swung open, and my director of public relations, a sharp, fiercely protective woman named Sarah, rushed into the room. She was clutching a tablet, her face tight with panic. "Nia, we need to issue a statement immediately," Sarah said, dropping the tablet onto my desk. "Becky's video is going viral across every major platform. Several digital news outlets are already picking up the story. They are framing this as a massive domestic abuse and financial control scandal. We need to release the police report. We need to show them the footage of Chloe destroying the house and stealing your grandmother's pearls. We have to shut this narrative down before it impacts our institutional investors." I looked at Sarah, then down at the paused video of Becky crying on my screen. I reached out and gently closed my laptop. "We are not releasing anything, Sarah," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. Sarah stared at me, completely stunned. "Nia, they are slaughtering your reputation online. They are calling you a predator. If we do not fight back right now, people will believe her." "Let them believe her," I replied, standing up and walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. Never fight a pig in the mud, Sarah. You both get dirty, but the pig actually likes it. Becky wants me to issue a frantic, angry statement. She wants me to go on the defensive because it will only validate her claim that I am an aggressive, hostile woman. She wants a public war. I'm not going to give her one. But the brand, Sarah protested, stepping closer. The brand is bulletproof, I assured her. Our investors care about returns, not TikTok drama. Do absolutely nothing. Do not engage. Do not comment. Let Becky go on every podcast that will invite her. Let her build a massive platform on this lie. I want her to climb as high as she possibly can, because the higher she flies, the more spectacular the impact will be when I finally cut her wings. When the truth comes out, and it will, I want her entire social standing to be utterly obliterated. Give her enough rope, Sarah. She is tying her own noose as we speak. Sarah took a deep breath, recognizing the absolute finality in my tone. She nodded slowly, picking up her tablet. Understood. Total radio silence. We let them burn themselves. Exactly, I said. As Sarah left the office, my private line began to ring. It was Elias, the head of my internal auditing team, working in tandem with my lead legal counsel. I picked up the receiver. Tell me some good news, Elias, I said. You are going to love this, Elias said, a distinct note of amusement in his voice. We have been monitoring Marcus's financial maneuvers since he filed the divorce petition this morning. He knows he is going to need a mountain of liquid cash to fight you in court and to pay for the high-profile criminal defense attorney Chloe is going to need, since you froze all his access to the joint accounts he is scrambling. What is his desperate play? I asked, leaning against the glass window. He is attempting to secure a home equity line of credit, Elias explained. He just submitted an emergency application to a private high-interest lender. He is trying to pull cash out against his mother's massive estate in Alpharetta. But that is not all. He also bundled the application with the commercial lease for Becky's boutique. He is trying to leverage both properties to get a massive cash injection, convinced that he is going to win this divorce settlement and easily pay it all back. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Marcus was a fool. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to maintain his lavish lifestyle that he had not bothered to check the actual standing of his family's assets. He assumed that because his mother lived in that sprawling house, and because Becky operated her failing boutique in that high-end commercial space, that they actually had equity to borrow against. He did not realize that I had spent the last 24 hours orchestrating a masterpiece of financial ruin. Has the private lender processed his application yet? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. They are processing it right now, Elias confirmed. They are running the title checks and pulling the deeds. Marcus and his lawyers are sitting in their office right now, popping champagne, thinking they have just secured their war chest. Perfect, I said. I want you to make sure our corporate holding company is ready to officially respond to that title check. I want Marcus to be sitting right there in that lender's office when they pull the records. Let me know the exact second he realizes what I have done. I hung up the phone and looked out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. Marcus thought he could use his family's assets to fund his war against me. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his family did not own those assets anymore. They were playing checkers on a board that I completely owned. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute thrill of the impending destruction. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut on the men who thought they could conquer me. Across town, inside a dimly lit, aggressively air-conditioned office, tucked away in a nondescript commercial park in Midtown Atlanta, Marcus was sweating through his bespoke Italian suit. He was sitting across from a loan officer who looked less like a banking professional and more like a high-end loan shark. This was not a branch of Chase or Wells Fargo. The major financial institutions had laughed Marcus out of their lobbies the moment they ran his credit profile. Without my name attached to his applications, and with the massive freezes I had placed on our joint accounts, Marcus had the financial credibility of a college freshman. He had been forced to seek out a private equity hard money lender, a firm known for handing out massive sums of cash to desperate people at completely predatory interest rates. Marcus wiped his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief and stared at the towering stack of legal documents resting on the cheap laminate desk. He needed this cash injection immediately. Chloe was facing serious felony charges for grand larceny and property damage, and the criminal defense attorney he wanted to hire required a massive retainer up front. On top of that, Marcus had hired a notoriously aggressive divorce lawyer to bleed me dry in court, a man who billed thousands of dollars an hour. He also needed to fund a massive public relations campaign to capitalize on the viral victim narrative Becky had started on social media. Marcus firmly believed that if he could just get his hands on a war chest, he could destroy me, take half of my empire, and pay back whatever exorbitant loan he took out today with millions to spare. The loan officer slid a silver pen across the desk. "The terms are clearly outlined on page 4, Mr. Dubois. We are approving a line of credit for $800,000. This is secured by the primary residential estate in Alpharetta, currently deeded to your mother, as well as the commercial lease and inventory of Southern Elegance, the boutique operated by your sister-in-law. The interest rate is fixed at 28% compounding monthly. If you miss a single payment, the default clauses are immediate and aggressive. Do you understand these terms?" Marcus did not even blink at the 28% interest rate. He was entirely consumed by his own arrogance and his desperate need to maintain the illusion of power. He picked up the silver pen, his hand trembling slightly with adrenaline. He justified his actions with the twisted logic of a true narcissist. He convinced himself that he was protecting his family by leveraging his mother's home. He believed he was a visionary patriarch doing whatever it took to secure their future. He did not care that he was gambling the roof over his elderly mother's head. He did not care that he was putting his brother's wife in the crosshairs of a ruthless financial institution. He only cared about defeating me. Simultaneously, 12 miles away in the serene, soundproof sanctuary of my penthouse office, I was sitting perfectly still behind my glass desk. The air smelled of expensive leather and fresh lilies. Elias, my head of internal auditing, stood silently beside me. He placed a single, impeccably organized leather folder in front of me. Inside was a commercial debt acquisition contract. "It is happening right now," Elias said, his voice a low, steady murmur. "The private lender Marcus is using operates as a subsidiary of a massive shadow banking network. We do millions of dollars in institutional trading with their parent company every single quarter. When I reached out to their executive board this morning and offered to buy the paper on Marcus's loan at a 5% premium, the exact second it originates, they were more than happy to bypass their usual holding periods. They are packaging the debt and transferring the title rights to our blind shell company as we speak." I picked up my favorite fountain pen, a heavy gold-plated Mont Blanc. I unscrewed the cap, listening to the soft metallic glide of the threads. Marcus thought he had found a loophole. He thought he had outsmarted me by running to the shadowy corners of the financial district where my direct influence supposedly could not reach him. He had absolutely no comprehension of how true wealth operated. I did not just have money, I was the market. I possessed the capital and the connections to buy the very ground he was trying to stand on. As Marcus forcefully pressed his pen into the signature line at the hard money lender, officially pledging his mother's sprawling Alpharetta estate as collateral, I pressed my gold pen to the acquisition contract in my office. Marcus flipped to the next page, signing away the commercial rights, the inventory, and the operational lease of Becky's fashion boutique. He smiled as he wrote his name, imagining the look of absolute devastation on my face when his high-priced lawyers served me with a mountain of aggressive litigation. He envisioned himself walking out of the divorce proceedings as a multimillionaire, a conquering hero who had tamed the hostile, controlling black woman. At the exact same moment, I signed my name with elegant sweeping strokes, officially purchasing the totality of his new debt. I was now the sole owner of the financial guillotine hovering directly over his mother's neck and his sister-in-law's failing business. The poetic justice of the transaction was deeply satisfying. Becky had sat in my living room clutching a $40,000 handbag I had paid for and dared to lecture me about my aggressive financial behavior. She had uploaded a tearful, manipulative video to the internet painting me as a predator who attacked innocent white families. Now her entire professional existence, every dress in her store, the very lease that kept her doors open, belonged entirely to me. Jamal had stood in my house puffing out his chest, demanding that I respect his brother as a provider. Now the mother who raised them both was one missed payment away from being evicted by my collection attorneys. They had all enabled Marcus. They had all fed off my success while privately despising me. It was only right that their assets served as the collateral for his ultimate downfall. I closed the leather folder and handed it back to Elias. Execute the transfer, I instructed calmly. The second the funds hit Marcus's account, I want our legal team to begin drafting the notice of default. He will inevitably miss his first payment because I am legally freezing the very accounts he intends to use to service this loan. When that happens, we do not send a warning. We do not offer a grace period. We send the sheriff. Elias nodded, taking the folder. He is walking out of the lender's office right now. The funds have been released. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the bright blue Atlanta sky. The trap was perfectly sealed. Across town, Marcus pushed open the heavy glass doors of the commercial park and stepped out into the oppressive Georgia heat. He took a deep breath, the smog and humidity filling his lungs. He felt like a titan. He felt completely invincible. The notification had just popped up on his phone confirming that $800,000 in liquid cash had successfully landed in his newly opened secure private checking account. He adjusted his silk tie, a triumphant, arrogant smirk spreading across his face. He had beaten the system. He had beaten me. He pulled his phone from his pocket and immediately dialed a number. He paced back and forth on the hot pavement, his adrenaline surging, waiting for the call to connect. Becky picked up on the second ring, the sound of classical music playing softly in the background of her boutique. "Marcus, tell me you got it," she said, her voice tight with anxious anticipation. Marcus let out a loud, victorious laugh that echoed off the brick walls of the parking lot. "The money is ready," he announced, his chest swelling with pride. "The funds just cleared. I am wiring the retainer to the criminal defense attorney for Chloe right now, and the divorce lawyers are officially on the clock. We have an $800,000 war chest, Becky." "Oh, thank God," Becky breathed, genuine relief flooding her words. "The video is still climbing in views, Marcus. The public is completely on our side. Everyone sees Nia for the tyrant she really is. We just need to keep the pressure on." "That is exactly what we are going to do," Marcus promised, walking toward his borrowed car with a renewed sense of absolute dominance. "We are going to strike while the iron is hot. Next week, at your boutique's big brand relaunch party, I will officially announce my campaign for president of the Business Association. With this public relations momentum and the cash to back it up, I am going to sweep the election. I will have the entire corporate community of Atlanta standing behind me. Soon, Nia will be pushed to the curb, completely isolated and begging for a settlement. We won, Becky. We actually won." The dry erase marker squeaked sharply against the pristine glass board in my executive suite. I stood back, capping the heavy black marker, and surveyed the intricate financial web I had just drawn. From a low angle, the transparent board framed my silhouette against the towering Atlanta skyline, a fitting backdrop for the empire I commanded. At the very top of the glass, I had written the name of my primary firm. Branching down from it were the names of 3 blind shell companies registered in Delaware entities, completely untraceable to anyone without a federal subpoena. At the bottom of the web were 3 names written in bold red ink: Marcus, Becky, Jamal. The heavy mahogany doors of my office swung open, and Elias walked in, carrying a stack of embossed legal folders. He did not say a word at first. He simply walked over to my glass desk and arranged the folders in a perfectly straight line. He looked up at the glass board, studying the diagram I had mapped out, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across his face. "The ink is dry," Elias announced, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "The wire transfers have cleared the international holding accounts. The acquisitions are officially complete and recorded with the county clerk. You are now the sole owner of the paper." I walked away from the glass board and took my seat behind the desk. I ran my hands over the smooth leather of the first folder. The general public truly has no idea how the ultra-wealthy wage war. They think power is measured in loud arguments, viral social media videos, or messy divorce filings. They do not understand that true power is entirely silent. It operates in the margins, in the fine print of commercial debt, and in the ruthless execution of asset liquidation. I did not need to scream at Marcus or defend myself against Becky and her fake internet tears. I just needed to buy the ground they were standing on. I opened the first folder. It contained the complete commercial debt portfolio for Southern Elegance Becky's failing fashion boutique. For years, she had paraded around Atlanta high society playing the role of a successful, progressive white business owner who generously employed minority women. The reality was that her store had not turned a profit in 36 months. Marcus had secretly kept her afloat using my money, and when things got desperate, he forged my corporate guarantee to secure her commercial lease. Because Marcus committed fraud to obtain that guarantee, I had the legal right to recall the debt. But I went a step further. I used one of my shell companies to buy out her primary commercial lender entirely. I purchased her building lease, her outstanding vendor invoices, and the massive line of credit she used to buy her seasonal inventory. I looked at the legal creditor certificate bearing the name of my shell company. I was no longer just Becky's sister-in-law. I was her sole landlord, her primary supplier, and her ultimate collection agency. The moment I chose to call in that debt, she would not just lose her store, she would face total personal bankruptcy. I set Becky's file aside and opened the second folder. This one contained a much more delicate and devastating piece of leverage, the Alpharetta estate. For years, Marcus's mother had hosted family gatherings in that sprawling suburban home, constantly making passive-aggressive comments about how Marcus had married beneath his social status, despite the fact that I paid for the very food she served on her table. Marcus had just used that exact house as collateral to secure his $800,000 hard money loan. He was so arrogant and so desperate to hire lawyers to destroy me that he failed to conduct a basic title search on his own mother's property. If he had, he would have discovered that his mother had secretly taken out a massive reverse mortgage on the estate 5 years ago, just to maintain her country club lifestyle. The house was already leveraged to the hilt. When Marcus pledged the deed to the private equity lenders this morning, he triggered an immediate default clause in his mother's original reverse mortgage contract. Elias pointed to the highlighted section of the contract. The original bank was going to initiate foreclosure proceedings on his mother by the end of the month, Elias explained. But our shell company stepped in and purchased the entire reverse mortgage portfolio at a slight premium. The bank was thrilled to offload the toxic asset. I traced the signature line with my finger. By layering a predatory high-interest hard money loan on top of a defaulted reverse mortgage, Marcus had effectively handed the deed of his family's generational home directly to me. He thought he was building a war chest to fight me in divorce court. In reality, he had just sold me his mother's house for pennies on the dollar. And then there was the final folder. The $800,000 loan Marcus had just secured this very morning. Because I had purchased the debt from the shadow lender, I was the one dictating the terms of collection. Private equity hard money loans operate on incredibly strict, unforgiving schedules. The first interest payment was due in exactly 3 days. Marcus had confidently set up an automatic wire transfer from the joint checking account he assumed he still had access to. He did not know that I had legally frozen that account during the initial audit. When that automatic transfer bounces on Monday morning, I said, looking up at Elias, it triggers the immediate default protocol on the entire $800,000 principal. Exactly, Elias confirmed. In traditional banking, he would get a grace period, maybe a phone call from a friendly loan officer. But in the unregulated private equity sector, a bounced first payment is considered a breach of contract and an indicator of massive fraud. The entire balance becomes due immediately, and the lender has the right to seize all listed collateral without a standard court-ordered eviction process. I closed the final folder and stacked them neatly in the center of my desk. The silence in the office was heavy with impending destruction. Marcus, Jamal, and Becky were out there right now celebrating. They were toasting to their impending victory, completely oblivious to the fact that they were dancing on a trapdoor and my hand was resting firmly on the lever. They thought they could steal my wealth, humiliate me in my own home, and use the court of public opinion to break my spirit. They relied on the tired stereotype that a black woman would become loud, emotional, and reactive under pressure. They counted on me losing my composure so they could point their fingers and play the victims. Instead, I had remained perfectly still, calculating their exact weight and cutting the ropes that held them up. I picked up the stack of legal creditor certificates, feeling the thick textured paper between my fingertips. A deep, resonant sense of justice settled over me. Now I whispered, staring at the documents. Every single brick of your houses belongs to me. Every dress in your store belongs to me. The very ground your mother sleeps on belongs to me. I handed the folders back to Elias. Keep these in the primary vault. Do not initiate any collection notices or foreclosure warnings yet. I want them to remain completely in the dark for a few more days. Let them spend that loan money on lawyers and public relations firms. Let them dig the hole so deep that the sunlight completely disappears. Elias nodded, taking the documents. When do we execute the default? Next week, I replied, standing up from my desk. Becky is hosting a massive relaunch party for her boutique to capitalize on her new viral internet fame. Marcus is planning to use that exact event to announce his candidacy for president of the local business association. They have invited the press, the city council, and every elite socialite in Atlanta. They want a public spectacle. I am going to give them one they will never, ever forget. I walked out of my office and took my private elevator down to the executive parking garage. My driver was waiting by the town car, ready to take me back to my suite at the Waldorf Astoria. The city of Atlanta blurred past the tinted windows, but my mind was entirely focused on the upcoming event. When I arrived at the hotel, I bypassed the living area and walked straight into the massive walk-in closet of the master suite. I had instructed my personal stylist to bring a selection of garments for the upcoming week, but I already knew exactly what I was going to wear. I reached past the muted business suits and the conservative evening gowns. My hand settled on a custom-tailored floor-length silk gown. The color was a brilliant, unapologetic blood red. It was a dress designed not to blend in, but to command absolute attention. It was the color of power, the color of warning, and the color of a woman who was about to burn an entire dynasty to the ground. I pulled the dress from the rack and held it up against myself in the full-length mirror. The reflection staring back at me was not a victim. It was not a woman mourning the end of a marriage or the betrayal of a blended family. It was a predator dressed and ready for the slaughter. I smiled at my reflection, the anticipation humming through my veins like an electric current. Marcus and Becky wanted the world to watch them destroy me. I was going to make sure they had the best seats in the house for their own execution. The heavy door of my chartered Rolls-Royce swung open. The cool evening air of Atlanta hit my face, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and desperate ambition. I stepped out onto the pristine red carpet. My custom silk gown cascaded around me in a brilliant, unapologetic shade of crimson. I was a walking inferno stepping into a room full of dry kindling. Camera flashes erupted instantly. The local press had gathered in droves, hungry for a glimpse of the supposedly bitter, soon-to-be-divorced billionaire they had been reading about all week on social media. I did not hide my face. I held my head high, offering the photographers a sharp, perfectly composed smile. Let them take their pictures. By tomorrow morning, these photos would not accompany a story about my downfall. They would be the cover image of my absolute triumph. The grand ballroom of the boutique hotel was dripping in ridiculous excess. Marcus had spared no expense using the very loan money I now legally owned to fund this grand masquerade. Giant floral arrangements choked the dining tables. Waiters circulated with silver trays of imported caviar and vintage champagne. In the center of the room, Becky had set up an elaborate display of her new fashion line, a collection of overpriced, uninspired garments that looked exactly like the woman who designed them. Dull, derivative, and completely lacking substance. And there, standing by the main stage under a massive spotlight, was Marcus. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch, shaking hands with city council members and local business tycoons. He was playing the benevolent patriarch, the rising political star soaking in the admiration of people who had absolutely no idea his entire life was built on a foundation of stolen money and lies. He was so completely intoxicated by his own fake image that he did not even realize he was a dead man walking. I glided across the marble floor. The crowd parted around me like the Red Sea. Whispers rippled through the room as conversations abruptly stopped. People pointed their eyes wide with shock that I had actually shown up to the lion's den. I was supposed to be hiding in shame. I was supposed to be terrified of the public backlash Becky had orchestrated. Instead, I was commanding the room without saying a single word. Marcus saw me first. His confident smile vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of genuine panic before his massive ego overrode his common sense. He whispered something to Becky, and the two of them marched toward me, intentionally drawing the attention of the surrounding journalists and socialites. They wanted a public execution. They wanted to humiliate the aggressive black woman in front of the Atlanta elite to secure his political campaign and her victim status. I was more than happy to oblige. "Oh, look everyone," Marcus announced, his voice booming across the room, to ensure the reporters caught every single word. "The woman who is about to lose half her fortune because of her own cruelty actually dares to show her face here tonight." He stopped a few feet away from me, crossing his arms, a smug, victorious sneer plastered on his face. "I guess you came to beg for a settlement before the judge strips you of everything." Becky stepped up beside him, clutching her husband Jamal by the arm. She put on that familiar, patronizing expression, her voice dripping with fake pity and performative distress. "Nia, this is a private event for family and actual supporters. You have done enough damage to us. You put a teenager in jail. You tried to ruin our lives just because you cannot handle your own aggressive emotions. You really need to leave before you embarrass yourself any further in front of these important people." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer them the angry defensive reaction they were desperately trying to provoke. I simply raised two fingers, signaling a passing waiter. The young man hurried over, trembling slightly, and offered his silver tray. I picked up a crystal flute of champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp bubbles wash over my tongue. I looked at Marcus, then at Becky, my eyes locking onto theirs with the cold, dead certainty of an apex predator looking at its next meal. "I am not here to embarrass myself," I said, my voice smooth, melodic, and perfectly projected so the nearby journalists could hear every syllable. "I am simply here to inspect my investment. It is customary for the owner to check on the property before liquidating it." Marcus let out a loud, mocking laugh, looking around at his wealthy guests for validation. "Your investment. You are completely delusional, Nia. You own nothing here. My campaign is fully funded. Becky's store is fully secured. You have zero power over us anymore. You are just a bitter ex-wife who cannot stand the fact that we survived without your money." Becky nodded vigorously, emboldened by her brother-in-law's arrogance. "Exactly. We built this all on our own. You cannot control us anymore." I took another sip of my champagne, letting my gaze drift past Marcus's shoulder toward the massive glass doors at the entrance of the ballroom. I did not need to argue with him. I did not need to explain the intricate web of commercial debt acquisition I had just executed. The universe was about to deliver my rebuttal in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors swung open. But it was not another wealthy donor, a fashion critic, or a late-arriving socialite stepping onto the red carpet. It was the harsh, unmistakable glare of blue and red strobe lights reflecting off the polished marble floors. Two massive vehicles from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office had just parked directly on the red carpet, blocking the valet lane completely. 4 uniformed deputies, their badges gleaming under the chandelier lights, stepped out of the vehicles. They were accompanied by 2 men in sharp gray suits carrying thick leather briefcases. My attorneys. They marched straight into the venue with absolute, undeniable authority. The live band abruptly stopped playing. The chatter died instantly. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. I lowered my champagne glass and smiled at Marcus, watching the color completely drain from his face as the deputies approached the stage. The heavy boots of the Fulton County deputies echoed across the polished marble floor, their radios crackling in the dead silence of the ballroom. The elite crowd of Atlanta parted instantly, a wave of diamonds, custom tuxedos, and stunned faces shrinking back from the center aisle. Camera flashes went off in rapid succession, capturing the exact moment the carefully constructed facade of Marcus Dubois began to crack. He stood frozen under the harsh spotlight, his glass of scotch hovering halfway to his mouth. The confident political candidate from 10 seconds ago was completely gone, replaced by a terrified man watching his reckoning march straight toward him. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralysis. He slammed his glass down on a passing waiter's tray and lunged forward to intercept the deputies before they could reach the main stage. He threw up his hands, plastering on his most polished, authoritative public relations smile, desperately trying to project control in front of the city council members and wealthy donors he had spent the entire evening courting. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking slightly despite his best efforts. "This is a private, exclusive event. You cannot just barge in here. We have city officials present. You need to leave right now before I make a phone call and have your badges taken." My lead litigation attorney did not even break his stride. He stepped smoothly around the deputies, closing the distance between himself and Marcus in a single second. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply took a thick, heavy stack of court-stamped documents and shoved them forcefully flat against Marcus's chest. The impact forced Marcus to instinctively grab the papers against his tuxedo jacket to stop them from hitting the floor. Fulton County Sheriff's Office. The lead deputy announced, his voice booming over the quiet whispers of the crowd. "We are executing an immediate commercial seizure, an asset freeze, and a lockout order for this business entity and all associated properties." Marcus stared down at the documents in his hands. His eyes darted frantically across the bold black text on the first page. Notice of default, immediate asset seizure, transfer of deed. I watched his breathing hitch. I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He was reading the exact address of his mother's expansive Alpharetta estate. He was reading the commercial lease number for Becky's failing fashion boutique. He was reading the terms of the $800,000 hard money loan he had signed just days ago. And right at the top of the creditor line, he was reading the name of my corporate holding company. While Marcus stood there hyperventilating over his own financial death warrant, I walked past him. My red silk gown brushed against his rigid legs. I ascended the 3 short steps to the main stage, my heels clicking sharply against the wood. I walked directly to the center podium, the exact spot Marcus had prepared for his triumphant political announcement. I reached out and tapped the microphone with my index finger. The sharp percussive thuds echoed through the massive ballroom sound system. Every single eye in the room snapped to me. The journalists pushed their way to the front, their cameras recording every second of the unfolding disaster. I looked out over the sea of shocked faces, taking a slow, calming breath. The power in the room had completely shifted, consolidating entirely into the palm of my hand. "I sincerely apologize for interrupting this beautiful evening," I said, my voice rich, smooth, and echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. "I know many of you came here tonight to support a new business venture and a promising political campaign. It is truly a shame to ruin such a festive mood, especially since this entire party, the champagne you are drinking, the caviar you are eating, and the venue you are standing in, was funded by stolen money." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The wealthy socialites turned to look at each other in sheer horror. The city council members, who had just been shaking Marcus's hand, immediately took several large steps backward, physically distancing themselves from a man who had just been publicly accused of fraud. From the side of the stage, a shrill, hysterical scream shattered the tension. Becky pushed her way through a rack of her overpriced, mediocre dresses. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her carefully cultivated image of the progressive, cultured victim completely evaporated. "Call the police!" Becky shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Arrest her! Arrest her right now for slander. She is making this all up. She is a bitter, jealous woman who is obsessed with destroying my family because her husband left her. Do not listen to a word she says. She is crazy. Arrest her." The irony of a white woman screaming for the police to arrest a black woman while standing feet away from the very deputies who were there, acting on my explicit legal orders, was almost too perfect. The deputies did not even look at Becky. They were already moving toward the cash registers and the inventory racks, pulling out yellow police tape to begin sealing the merchandise. I did not raise my voice to match Becky's hysterical screaming. I did not need to defend myself against her desperate accusations. I simply turned my head slightly, looking toward the audio-visual booth elevated at the back of the ballroom. The technician I had paid triple his daily rate gave me a swift nod. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers once. The bright chandeliers in the ballroom immediately dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd again as the massive floor-to-ceiling LED screen positioned directly behind me on the stage flickered to life. The glowing cursive logo of Becky's fashion brand vanished from the screen. "If I am making this up," I said, turning back to face the crowd with a predator's smile, "then let us take a look at the actual receipts, shall we? Let us show Atlanta exactly who is funding this family." The massive high-definition display illuminated the darkened ballroom, casting a harsh white glow over the terrified faces of the Atlanta elite. A high-resolution scan of a legal contract materialized on the screen spanning 20 feet across. At the very top, the words "Notice of Commercial Default and Asset Seizure" hovered in bold crimson letters. Beneath it was the signature of Marcus Dubois, completely unredacted for the entire city to witness. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the projector and the shallow, panicked breathing of the man standing at the base of the stage. Marcus looked up at the screen, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to paralyze him completely. The polished political candidate had vanished. In his place stood a fraud caught in the blinding light of his own arrogance. I leaned slightly toward the microphone. The spotlight isolated me from the shadows framing my red silk gown like a blazing fire against the dark stage. I locked my eyes directly onto Marcus, holding his gaze with the unwavering intensity of a judge delivering a final verdict. "Marcus," I said, my voice echoing flawlessly off the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. "Do you remember our Thanksgiving dinner? Do you remember looking me dead in the eye in front of your entire family while standing inside my $4 million home and telling me that Chloe is not my daughter, so I have no right to correct her?" Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw breath under the crushing weight of public humiliation. "You were right," I continued, the words slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "I am not her mother. I am the creditor of all of you." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Several city council members immediately turned their backs to Marcus, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of his destroyed reputation. Journalists aggressively snapped photos capturing the exact second the patriarch of the Dubois family was reduced to nothing. I slowly turned my head, shifting my lethal focus away from Marcus. I looked down into the shadows near the merchandise racks, finding the trembling figure of my sister-in-law. Becky was clutching her husband's arm, her face drained of all color, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. "And Becky," I said, lowering my tone to a deadly conversational pitch, "do you remember sitting on my custom velvet sofa just a few days ago, clutching a $40,000 handbag that I personally paid for and lecturing me about my culture? Do you remember looking down your nose at me and declaring that we Black women are simply too sensitive and aggressive with our money?" Becky shook her head rapidly, tears of pure panic spilling over her eyelashes. She opened her mouth to deny it, to play the victim one last time, but the sheer magnitude of the crowd staring at her in disgust silenced her completely. The elite socialites she had spent years trying to impress were now looking at her like she was a parasite exposed under a microscope. "Well, since I am so terribly sensitive with my finances, I decided to withdraw all of that sensitivity tonight," I announced. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers a second time. The image on the massive screen shifted instantly. The default notice was replaced by a side-by-side display of two highly classified financial documents. On the left was the commercial lease and operating agreement for Southern Elegance, the very boutique we were currently standing in. On the right was the private equity hard money loan Marcus had desperately signed that exact same morning. I want to explain to our distinguished guests exactly how the ultra-wealthy operate. I addressed the crowd, projecting my voice with absolute clarity. My firm specializes in distressed asset acquisition. When Marcus realized I had frozen the bank accounts he was using to fund his fake lifestyle, he ran to a shadow banking lender to secure an $800,000 war chest. He thought he was being clever. He had absolutely no idea that the private equity firm he begged for cash is a direct subsidiary of my own wealth management empire. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a mixture of awe and sheer terror at the level of strategic dismantling they were witnessing. Every single signature Marcus provided today transferred the total legal rights of this family directly to my desk. I explained, tracing a manicured finger in the air toward the screen. You did not secure a loan, Marcus. You legally handed me the deed to your mother's house, the commercial rights to your sister-in-law's failing business, and the leverage to completely liquidate your brother's fraudulent tech startup. Jamal, who had been standing rigidly next to his crying wife, suddenly surged forward. His ego could not handle the public exposure of his own failures. He tried to storm the stage, pointing an angry finger at me. "You cannot do this!" Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "That startup is mine. You have no right to touch my company." Before Jamal could even place a foot on the first step of the stage, a massive Fulton County Sheriff's deputy stepped directly into his path. The deputy placed a heavy, unyielding hand flat against Jamal's chest, stopping him instantly. The physical barrier served as a brutal reminder that they were no longer dealing with a compliant family member, they were dealing with the full force of the law. "Your startup has generated zero revenue in 3 years, Jamal," I stated, looking down at him with pure disdain. "It was entirely funded by money Marcus siphoned from my accounts under the guise of bad investments. You are not an entrepreneur, you are a dependent, and your funding has officially been cut off." I turned my attention back to the massive screen behind me, signaling the audio-visual technician one final time. The screen transitioned to the ultimate checkmate. A comprehensive, undeniable web of ownership materialized before the entire city of Atlanta. The graphic was incredibly detailed, mapping out every single asset the Dubois family claimed to own. The commercial lease for the boutique, the reverse mortgage on their mother's sprawling Alpharetta estate, the fraudulent startup capital, the student loans, the auto financing. Every single box on the screen was connected by thick red lines, and every single red line pointed upward, converging at the very top of the screen into one solitary, undeniable entity. Nia and Company Wealth Management. The visual representation of their total financial surrender was breathtaking. The certificates of debt ownership flashed across the display, each one bearing my corporate seal. They had spent years trying to make me feel small, trying to put me in my place, trying to convince me that I was lucky to be associated with their family. They had built an entire reality based on the delusion that my money was their birthright. Now the cold hard mathematics of their reality was broadcast on a 20-foot screen for the media to document forever. I looked at the legal creditor certificates glowing brilliantly against the dark backdrop. The sheer magnitude of my victory settled deep into my bones. I had not just defeated them, I had completely legally and methodically consumed them. I owned their past, their present, and their immediate future. I stepped back from the podium, letting the silence stretch out, allowing the absolute devastation of the moment to crush whatever remaining pride Marcus had left in his body. He was staring up at the screen, his mouth slightly open, his breathing shallow and erratic. The realization that every single brick of their houses, every rack of clothing in the store, and every dollar to their name now belonged entirely to me finally broke him. I smiled, letting the red silk of my gown catch the spotlight. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed them to dust. I looked down at the two of them from the elevated stage. From this high vantage point, Marcus and Becky appeared incredibly small. The grand, towering shadows they had tried to cast over my life for the past 2 years shrank into absolute nothingness. They were completely stripped of their unearned confidence, reduced to pathetic, trembling figures under the blinding, unforgiving glare of the projector. The massive web of debt ownership glowing on the screen behind me was the ultimate testament to their stupidity. They had brought a knife to a war fought with nuclear financial weapons. I leaned back into the microphone. My voice was no longer a booming echo designed to capture the room. It was a calm, lethal promise designed to cut straight to the bone. This commercial space, I announced, gesturing gracefully to the racks of overpriced clothing surrounding the horrified guests, is officially insolvent. The eviction order has already been processed by the courts. The deputies standing at the doors are not here for a photo opportunity. They are here to execute a physical lockout. As of this exact minute, Southern Elegance is bankrupt and permanently sealed. Becky let out a strangled, breathless gasp. Her knees simply gave out beneath her. She collapsed hard onto the polished marble floor. Her expensive silk dress pooled around her as she scrambled forward, grabbing the edge of the wooden stage with shaking hands. The arrogant, progressive white savior mask she wore so proudly completely melted away. Thick, dark streaks of mascara ran down her face, ruining her flawless makeup as she stared up at me in absolute terror. She watched in horror as the sheriff deputies began unfurling bright yellow police tape, methodically blocking off the cash registers and sealing her designer inventory into evidence bags. Her entire life's work, funded by my stolen money, was being boxed up right in front of her high society friends. "Nia, please!" Becky wailed, her voice cracking as she clawed at the floorboards. "You cannot do this to me. I put my entire life into this store. I have vendors to pay. I have employees who depend on me. We are family. You cannot put us out on the street like animals. Please, I am begging you. Have some mercy. Mercy!" I repeated, looking down at her sobbing, pathetic form. "You did not have mercy when you sat on my sofa and insulted my race to my face. You did not have mercy when you orchestrated a viral campaign, posting a video to millions of strangers, painting me as a vicious predator just to destroy my corporate brand. You weaponized your tears because you wanted the world to see me as a monster. I am simply giving you the monster you begged for." I turned my eyes away from her sobbing figure and locked my gaze back onto Marcus. He was sweating profusely. The custom-tailored tuxedo he had purchased using my credit card now looked like a straitjacket tightening around his chest. He was trembling, his eyes darting frantically toward the flashing cameras of the local press. "As for your mother, Marcus," I continued, projecting my voice, so the journalists in the front row caught every single syllable. "The reverse mortgage she defaulted on has been formally called in. The foreclosure proceedings are completely finalized. The sheriff will be arriving at her Alpharetta estate tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock to begin the physical eviction process. I highly suggest you leave this party and go help her pack her belongings. I hear moving boxes are quite expensive these days, especially when your bank accounts are frozen solid." Marcus shook his head frantically. He held his hands up in the air as if he could physically stop the words from hitting him. "Nia, stop. Stop talking right now. The press is here. The city council members are watching us. You are ruining my political campaign. You are ruining my entire life. We can settle this privately. We can go into a back room. I will sign whatever you want me to sign. Just tell them to turn the cameras off. Please, I am begging you." Before I could even formulate a response to his cowardly plea, a sharp, piercing ringtone sliced through the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom. It was coming from the inside pocket of Marcus's tuxedo jacket. He fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the device onto the marble floor. He answered the call, his thumb accidentally hitting the speaker button in his sheer, unadulterated panic. The shrill, hysterical sobs of his daughter echoed out into the dead quiet room, broadcasting her misery to the entire Atlanta social elite. "Dad!" Chloe screamed through the phone, her voice completely hoarse and ragged from crying. "Dad, where are you? You have to come get me right now." "They threw me out." Marcus stared at the phone in pure horror. "Chloe, slow down. Breathe. Who threw you out?" "The campus security." Chloe sobbed, her words blurring together in a frantic, terrifying panic. "They came to my dorm room an hour ago with empty boxes. They told me my tuition check bounced and my enrollment was permanently canceled. They made me pack all my things while everyone in the hallway watched me. I am sitting on the sidewalk outside the campus gates with all my garbage bags. It is freezing out here, Dad. My credit card is still locked. I cannot even call a cab to get to a hotel. You have to come get me right now. Marcus looked up at me from the base of the stage. His eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute terror and disbelief. You actually did it, he whispered, his voice cracking. You threw my 19-year-old daughter onto the street. I stepped away from the podium. I walked right to the very edge of the stage, looking down into his desperate, terrified eyes. The spotlight followed me, casting my red dress in a brilliant, fiery glow. I told you I canceled her tuition on Thanksgiving night, Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper that carried perfectly through the silent room. You just chose not to believe me. You thought I was making an empty threat because you are a man who operates entirely on empty threats. You thought you could use my money to bail her out of jail and fight me in divorce court, but your money was an illusion. And now, your entitled daughter is sitting on a cold sidewalk with absolutely nothing, which is exactly where she belongs. That was the exact moment Marcus completely broke. The realization that he had absolutely no power, no money, no leverage, and no way to save his family physically crushed him. His legs simply gave way beneath him. The proud, arrogant patriarch, the man who had publicly humiliated me in my own dining room, fell hard onto his knees right in front of the stage. The camera shutters went into an absolute frenzy. The brilliant, rapid flashes of white light illuminated Marcus on his knees, begging a black woman for mercy in front of the entire city. The political donors he had been trying to impress actively turned their backs, refusing to be photographed anywhere near the blast radius of his destroyed reputation. Nia, please, Marcus begged. Tears finally spilled down his cheeks, ruining his perfectly groomed facade. He reached out his hands, hovering in the air just inches from my designer shoes, too terrified to actually touch my ankles. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so arrogant and stupid. I will drop the divorce petition tomorrow. I will drop the alimony claims. I will get on my knees and apologize to you on national television if that is what you want me to do. Just do not take my mother's house. Do not leave my daughter freezing on the street. Please, Nia. I am begging you. Save my face. Do not let the press photograph me like this. He was not crying for his elderly mother facing eviction. He was not crying for his daughter sitting on a curb. He was crying because the press was documenting his absolute destruction. His fragile male ego was bleeding out onto the marble floor, and he was desperately begging me to put a bandage over the wound. I looked down at the pathetic, broken man weeping at my feet. I looked at the man who had stared at me with pure venom and told me I was nothing but a walking bank account. I looked at the man who had allowed his spoiled child to disrespect my home, my heritage, and my boundaries. I reached over to the small cocktail table sitting on the edge of the stage. I picked up my crystal flute of champagne. I took one final deliberate sip, letting the crisp, cold liquid wash over my tongue. I slowly lowered the glass, setting it down on the table with a soft, definitive clink. I tilted my head, looking down at Marcus, with eyes completely void of sympathy, completely empty of mercy. Do you remember what you told me, Marcus? I asked softly, my words carrying clearly over his pathetic, racking sobs. Do you remember what you said when she threw that wine across my floor? Marcus stared up at me, his face pale and slick with sweat, his mouth opening and closing as he failed to find his voice. You told me not to correct her, I whispered, leaning down just slightly so he could feel the coldness radiating from my soul. You told me I had no right to fix her mistakes. I offered him a final, flawless, terrifying smile. I took your advice, Marcus. I do not correct mistakes. I simply erase them. I turned my back on him. I did not look at the crying, ruined woman clawing at the floorboards. I did not look at the man begging on his knees in his ruined tuxedo. I did not look at the stunned faces of the journalists or the terrified politicians who now knew exactly what happens when you cross Nia Dubois. I simply gathered the luxurious red silk of my gown, stepped gracefully off the side of the stage, and walked straight out of the ballroom, leaving them to burn in the ashes of the empire I had just completely incinerated. The lead detective did not hand the digital tablet back to me. He kept his eyes locked on the glowing screen. He pressed his thick finger against the glass to resume the high-definition playback. The silent security footage continued to roll forward without a single glitch. The camera captured the exact moments immediately following the blatant federal forgery. Rachel pushed the heavy leather chair back from my mahogany desk. She stood up and smoothed out the wrinkles in her expensive silk dress. She did not leave my private sanctuary right away. She began to wander slowly around the locked room. She inspected the wooden bookshelves and the locked filing cabinets. Her greedy eyes constantly searched for more hidden treasures to steal. She eventually circled back to the corner of my desk. A small, faded black velvet box rested quietly next to a brass lamp. I had left that specific box out in the open on purpose. The hidden camera zoomed in slightly as Rachel reached out and grabbed the delicate container. She snapped the lid open without any hesitation. The bright lens captured the brilliant sparkle of two platinum bands resting inside. They were Martha and her original wedding rings. I had kept those rings perfectly polished and safely hidden away for 13 long years. Rachel stared down at the priceless, incredibly sentimental family heirlooms. A cold, wicked smile crept across her face. She did not admire the beautiful craftsmanship or consider the deep emotional significance of the jewelry. She simply calculated their raw monetary value in her head. She reached her fingers into the soft velvet lining. She pulled both platinum rings out of the box. She did not put them back. She casually slipped the heavy diamond bands directly into the deep pocket of her designer coat. She snapped the empty velvet box shut and tossed it carelessly back onto my desk. The lead detective watched her commit this deeply personal, incredibly intimate theft in crystal-clear resolution. He let out a slow, heavy sigh of pure disgust. He had seen countless financial crimes throughout his long career. He rarely witnessed such a profound, callous violation of a grieving family. He paused the video again. Lucas stood just a few feet away from the towering police detective. He had slowly stepped forward while the high-definition video played out. He positioned himself perfectly to see the glowing digital screen over the broad shoulder of the law enforcement officer. He watched his wife commit the initial act of federal forgery with a blank, terrified expression. He realized she had completely destroyed their financial future through her blind ambition. However, the sight of the real estate crime did not completely break him. He still clung desperately to the pathetic hope that she had acted out of a twisted sense of marital preservation. That incredibly foolish illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces the exact moment she opened the black velvet box. Lucas recognized his late mother and her platinum wedding rings instantly. He had held those exact rings in his own hands on the terrible day of the funeral 13 years ago. He knew how deeply I cherished those specific pieces of jewelry. He watched the clear footage of his wife stealing the most sacred, sentimental objects in our entire family history. He saw the cold, calculating greed flashing in her eyes as she shoved the diamonds into her pocket. The air completely vanished from his lungs. His knees buckled slightly under the crushing weight of the absolute betrayal. The massive federal real estate fraud was a crime born of extreme financial desperation. The theft of the wedding rings was an act of pure, unadulterated malice. It was a vicious, deeply personal violation that could never be justified or explained away. Lucas finally understood the true horrific nature of the woman he had married. He realized she had never loved him. She had never respected our family. She viewed us entirely as disposable assets waiting to be fully exploited. The heavy fog of denial that had clouded his judgment for over a decade instantly evaporated in the cold harbor wind. He stared at the paused digital screen with raw, unfiltered horror. The awful image of Rachel smirking as she stole from a dead woman burned permanently into his mind. His hands began to shake uncontrollably at his sides. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, physically distancing himself from the monster standing in the center of the wooden deck. His awakening was brutal, agonizing, and entirely complete tonight. Rachel realized the devastating impact of the security footage. She saw the lead detective lower the digital tablet and reach slowly toward the metallic handcuffs resting on his heavy leather duty belt. A sudden violent surge of absolute panic completely overtook her. She recognized that her wealthy facade had been entirely obliterated in front of the federal agents and the local police force. She desperately needed a lifeline to pull her out of the catastrophic legal nightmare. She turned her frantic, wide eyes directly toward her husband. She reached her trembling hands out to him, attempting to invoke the deep marital bond she had just ruthlessly violated. She begged Lucas to step forward and intervene on her behalf. She pleaded with him in a high, hysterical voice to tell the stern detective that the entire situation was just a massive family misunderstanding. She desperately asked him to lie to the armed officers and claim that I had explicitly given her formal permission to take the documents and the platinum rings. She expected him to blindly shield her from the severe consequences of her own actions, just as he had always done in the past. Lucas did not rush to her side. He did not raise his voice to defend her honor against the mounting criminal charges. He looked at her outstretched hands with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The absolute betrayal he had just witnessed on the high-definition screen had permanently severed his emotional attachment to her. He slowly took another heavy, deliberate step backward. He physically and symbolically abandoned her on the polished teak deck of the luxury yacht. He stared into her terrified eyes and offered her absolutely no comfort. He flatly refused to speak a single word in her defense to the waiting law enforcement officers. He silently communicated that she was completely and totally on her own. Rachel let out a loud, agonizing gasp. Her arms dropped limply to her sides. She finally understood that her husband had officially turned against her. She recognized that she had successfully alienated the very last person on earth who might have possibly tried to save her from federal prison. She stood completely alone under the harsh harbor floodlights. She was entirely surrounded by heavily armed government agents, angry creditors, and an utterly disgusted family. The total isolation was completely and entirely suffocating.